Hey y'all, I've been getting questions on and off for a long time about how to draw hair. I promised many times that I'd make a tutorial, and now I finally am. I should state that I'm definitely not the best at it, but I hope my method can help out any of you watching this video. So, let's get started. I guess the first thing when it comes to drawing hair is knowing what shape you'd like the hair to be. Like whether you want it to be like straight hair or curly hair. It's more wavy, but whatever. Or really loopy frizzy hair. But depending on what direction and shape the hair is going to be, it can change your method quite drastically. Like starting with the straight hair. So I guess let's just like kind of draw a reference head real quick. Right, this definitely is not the best. Like pretty it's pretty rough, but we're not learning how to draw faces today. Um so yeah, there we go. Stop messing with it. Okay. When it comes to drawing hair, let's say that this person has very straight hair. You want to decide where the part or the split of your hair is going to be. So for, I guess, simplicity's sake, let's make it straight down the middle right here. So the part will actually go with the curve of the head. Don't just make it like a straight line across their head. So the part of the hair is this strip right here. And then, you got all the fun features down here. And then since straight hair, let's just cut it straight down like this. And notice that I'm actually coming off the head a little bit when I draw the hair out here. And that is because okay, I'm so bad at explaining things, but your hair is not going to be perfectly flat to your head, because in your drawing it'll either make their head look really small, or it's going to make their hair look more like it's painted onto them rather than, a dimensional thing, depending on like if you draw either cartoony or realistic or semi-realistic. It just like depends on what you want the hair to look like. So let's say this person has a really shitty haircut like this, okay? And straight hair coming off the head. I'm gonna erase the parts of the head that the hair is covering up so that we don't need to look at it anymore. Because we're really not gonna need it when it comes to rendering underneath. And again, for simplicity's sake, just gonna make the color the color gray so that you can see more like shading and more of shades, tones, and highlights with it than, color theory. That could be a little bit later. I feel like I should also mention I use a textured brush for shading hair so that I still have like some of the like bristly line look to it, so it looks more like individual strands of hair. It's fairly easy to make your own brush like that, but I'll leave a link to the hairbrush that I made in the description. So if you want to mess around with it, you can. So with hair like this, it's going to have pretty obvious areas of like the absolute shadows and the absolute highlight. So the darkest areas and the lightest areas. So well, up here by the part, it's going to be a bit darker because the hair is going in like this. So this crevice right here is going to be darker than the area out here. So let's just put some black down right there. And then towards the end of the hair here at the bottom, we're going to also add a little bit more of that black color. And in this funky little area, you can imagine that the hair is kind of coming out like this, and we're seeing hair tucked behind over here. So I like to add a bit of shading to a spot like that. Yeah, and this is for a side 3/4 view, whatever you want to call it. And from here, we go from our shading edges, our rough block edges, and kind of just make little quick strokes outward. And it's very important that you go with the shape of the hair itself so that it kind of just sells the volume and dimension that you have the hair at. And then at this point, I kind of like to make some of these get closer to each other, so it kind of looks like the hair has sections to it, because nobody's hair is going to just be completely flat in the center like this. It's going to kind of have, you know, different overlaying locks and stuff like that, so it creates more varied patterns of depth in the hair, I would say. And if it's too dark, which a lot of times I do make it too dark, you just grab whatever that mid color is, or that flat color in the center is, and go back over into the areas and do the same thing that we did with the shading, but you're starting from the center going outward in both directions. And you can push it as far as you want it to. Like up here, I definitely put too much shading into the hair, so I'm going to push that dark back a bit to regain some control over it. And another thing I like to do, specifically on this side in these types of drawings, is to kind of, at the root, start putting a little bit of that mid color right at the base, going up. I'm gonna do it on the other side too, because why not? Just because it makes it look like, you know, that the light is very, I don't know, dynamic or whatnot. I just like it. Just really the bare bones necessity of whatever you need in your style. It's like, you just have to like it. Okay. And we are not done yet. So for highlights, I'm not going to go to absolute white. I'm going to get very close to it though, because having straight up white as a highlight, even in a grayscale drawing like this, means a very intense light on the subject and can make the hair look fake and more like a wig than, you know, somebody's actual hair, which that's what you're going for, fine. But if they are not wearing a wig, I would stay away from using straight up white. So what I'm doing is I'm going into the very center of these mid color lines and just adding a strip of absolute highlight into it. Say that this is the lightest part of the hair, according to the way the light is working. Again, with if I'm adding too much, it is a bit blended now, but I can select a kind of darker color or halfway color like this and push these back into a more narrow or direct space. And that same little stroke by stroke stripe of pattern. And for an easier transition to colors, I will lighten up the pressure on my tablet, well, with my hand, yeah, and just kind of like gently nudge itty bitty little lines into the area so it kind of just, blends into it more. And personally, one of my favorite things to do that I know for a fact to go overboard with just because it is fun is adding little like stray flyaway hairs, which can add a lot more depth and volume to the appearance of the hair. It makes it look more real and not just like sitting there on your head, because your hair does have structure to it and it can be more rigid than soft. So I just like to add little extra loops following the shape of the hair and do little curved lines outside of it. And some under here. And obviously adding more of these will make the hair look messier, which I personally like, but if you have a character or, person who is very, strict and like neat, uptight, I guess, then that maybe isn't the look you want to go for. And I'm just using black because it is the darkest color and the most noticeable color. And I'm not going into the highlighted parts again, so it really doesn't really matter, if that makes sense. I say as I start pushing into here, but it's fine. For the part, if you want it to, be more natural, you can do the same thing with that flyaway hair method, just kind of nudging into the space right here, adding little itty bitty lines and loops and fun stuff there. And if you want the highlights to be more intense, you can go on to another layer and do either add or glow or overlay, depending on what color you have, using a very intense color and just kind of going across it like this. And then I like to put a Gaussian blur on it, a very high setting so it's very soft, using a soft eraser, just kind of nudging the corners like this. Play with the opacity a little bit. And that is straight hair. Okay. So with wavy hair, you can have a lot more fun and freedom with the shape of it than, I guess, straight hair. So I guess we'll go with a middle part again because it's the easiest. And just kind of make loops and curls with it. Just have fun making these like swoopy shapes. Coming out, rolling in. That's a bit far out. All right. And again, for simplicity's sake, I'll just use a basic gray as the mid color. So grabbing black again, I'll establish the darker shading parts here around the part of the hair. And then getting to these fun shapes, you can really decide what you want them to do. So let's say this is more of a, I guess, loopy J kind of shape. Make a smaller brush so I can do tighter little shading bits. And in a crevice like this, I'll just go ahead and start making these little loops. Well, not loops, but curves that follow the direction of this specific chunk right here. And then up here, I kind of like to outline the hair, the outside along with it. Let's say it's this shape. In this area over here, I'll pull in some of that shading and go along with it like that. And then out here, I'll branch some of this shading upwards, out like that. And if you want, you can add some right here into the middle of it, if that tickles your fancy. Alright, so I've finished divvying up all these chunks and it is kind of looking like a hot mess right now, but that's fine. So again, like with the straight hair, I'll go into each of these individual chunks with the mid or flat tone that I set, and in areas where I feel like I've pushed the dark too far, I'll just go ahead and add this lighter color back in to kind of emphasize the separation of these chunks of hair. And it's very easy to actually get lost in the separate pieces that you're drawing. Like you can tell over here, there were just too many chunks and I just kept adding more and more and getting lost with it. So I'll darken up some of these to kind of, you know, disguise a lot of the awkward shapes. Alright, and again, you don't want to use straight up white, and in the areas that you've left unshaded, you want to add a smaller primary dominant section of highlight. So like up here, right in here, some of that, some of that, some of that. Alright, this is looking really messy, but you know, it's fine. And even with hair as like chaotic as this, I still like to add the little flyaways still following the shape of the hair. And as for the super tight curl type of hair, I am not too good at it, I will admit that, but I guess I do have a method, so I'm gonna go ahead and try that out. So as for a shape, I guess we'll go with extra tight curls, so the hair is more of like a frizz, if you will. So let's just kind of when you have super tight curls like this, it's kind of hard to determine a part in the hair. I guess you can, but for now I just won't do that because I don't feel like it. I will, however, add a bit of a widow's peak just to show a semblance of what this person's natural hairline would be. And we'll kind of come off the head a bit more because it's much tighter hair, much more rigidity and structure to it. There's a lot of layers going on, and the hair just kind of piles up. Now, for base color, I'm going to do gray yet again. Are we surprised at this point? Alright. And I will do my best to show you how to do this because it's still a method that I am working on myself, because there is a lot of texture that goes into it, and with me I focus more on, you know, painting it out rather than overlaying textures on top of each other. So I'm going to start with the black and kind of make little shapes, kind of like what we did with the wavy hair, but a lot tighter. And I'll kind of, it's essentially like stippling. I will go in and make itty bitty little strokes with this textured brush and just kind of go on and make a lot of like loopy and curly shapes. And since hair like this has a lot more layers and textures, it tends to have a lot more shade to it as well. Even if the person's hair isn't necessarily like dark to start off with, it'll still get discolored by all the layers just from how much darker the hair will be underneath from the shading that it gets, if that makes any sense. Just kind of making dot everywhere. And now I'm just kind of filling in areas that I want to be darker with some loopy strokes that are kind of going like this all throughout it. And at this point, if I feel like I have put too much of a dark color in one area, I will usually size down my brush quite a bit and just kind of come back into these areas and add little specks of that lighter color. And at the same time, it will establish more of a highlight color as well. And what I like to do with hair like this, since it has a lot more dimension to it, is I will get a very soft brush, make it really, really big, and go along the edges with a dark color. To make it look like it has a softer shade to it, you know? And, you know, erase the excess. Go into some of these areas with a smaller eraser. And just kind of gently reveal some of these parts. Do that around the edge too, so it doesn't just look like a hexagon. And then I like to actually take white and again with a soft brush run along the center part with the most highlight to it like this. Do add well, I should say I'm using white for this specific instance. In other drawings, I would just go into my color wheel and use a color that appears lighter. So if I'm using red, I would use a yellow color, but I digress. Then we go back in with this soft eraser and gently nudge the edges of this into a very tight line across the head. So it's like a very sharp arch of highlight. You can make it even smaller and kind of add a little bit of the roughage texture to it. Then I lower the opacity to about like under half, under 50%, and there we are. And of course, it would not be hair if it did not have little flyaways to go with it. So I'm going to add those as well. I'm going to use an even smaller brush this time. And just kind of, with that same kind of like flicking texture, add that to the edges of this hair. So it looks like short, little tight rings of hair. And there we go. These are the main ways that I draw different types of hair, or, well, hairstyles, hair types, hair length, well, not hair lengths, we haven't really covered that. But yeah, if you have a request for any other type of tutorial in the future, just let me know. And who knows, maybe I will actually get around to doing it at a reasonable time this time, instead of waiting 3 years after I promised to make one